Good evening, good evening, good evening, everyone. How are you? Happy Friday. We are all off work. I'm sure that it's been a long week. It's definitely been one for me, but I am excited to be with you guys. I first want to give an honor to God, thanking Him for all that He has done for me this week. I also want to give a shout out. Earlier this week, I posted that my friend Sheldon Johnson passed away. He was the baddest keyboarder on the planet, and he played Purple Rain for me at every single gig that I showed up to. I have known him for 20 years, and I am truly going to miss him dearly. I want to send my love and hugs and prayers to the family. And I'll be out celebrating his homegoing tomorrow. This evening, we may or may not have a guest. He's traveling right now, so we're just going to play that one by ear. But tonight's topic is toxic relationships, how we get in them and how we get out of them. And before I address my topic that I selected for this week, I want to talk about a post that I saw earlier today that I commented on. They had a young lady, it was a guy who posted about a young lady, and he said that she went out on a date. She didn't have, and at the end of the date, she asked her date to buy food for her children. He said no, and he promptly ended the date. Okay, so it looks like our guest is available, so I'm going to go ahead and bring him on. Give it just a moment because you know that it can take a moment. Um, hey,
Hello, people.
welcome, Mr. Paul Marshall. He is with us as our special guest tonight as we're going to be discussing toxic relationships. So I was actually, Paul, just discussing before I get into the topic that I saw a post this week. And they said a young lady, she went out on a date. She asked her date at the end of it to buy food for her children. He told her no, and then he promptly ended the date. So of course there were multiple people commenting, and a plethora of people were saying, well, maybe she just didn't have food for her children. Maybe she couldn't feed her children, and she thought that that was a good way to do it. So anyway, I commented that if she couldn't feed her children, she had no business being out on a date. And somebody asked me why I would say that. So the reason that I would say that, ladies and gentlemen, is that if you cannot feed your children, which is a priority, you probably should not be out trolling for a significant other. You should be focusing on figuring out how you're going to feed your children. So anyway, that being said, that was something that I saw earlier this week. And to me, if you don't even have the ability to feed your children and you're out trolling for a man, that's probably a gateway to a relationship that could be toxic. Are you still in the airport?
Yeah, I am, and I got to check on something.
Okay. Do you want to check on that and maybe come back to rejoin us?
Yes.
And then finally,
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, guys. So hopefully he'll rejoin us. He was traveling. He thought that he was going to be um, situated and settled by the time that we jumped on tonight, but no big deal. We will move on, and if he comes back, then we'll definitely be with him. But anyway, if you guys have thoughts on that, let me know. Um, some other people thought that maybe she was just testing this man. Maybe she was just trying to see if he's the kind of guy that would buy food for her children. Honestly, if you're out on a date and you're trying to figure out if someone is good for a situation in which you have kids, I honestly do not believe that that was the best way to approach that. At least I wouldn't have anyway, because if I were taking somebody on a date and the first thing they asked me is to buy food for their children, I don't know, I probably would just have a lot of questions about why they hadn't fed their children before they came out with me. Why are you out with me if you can't feed your children? I would definitely have questions about their own financial stability. I'm not saying that a person should be judged based on that, but I would have had some questions and some definite concerns. But anyway, moving on to toxic relationships. And the reason that I chose that topic is because, in correlation to what we've been discussing in childhood trauma, a lot of people who have experienced childhood trauma will pick a significant other from a place of their trauma. And when you're abused as a child, especially by someone who's either in a position of a trust, if it's a parent that's abusing you, a family member, what happens is you've learned to love the abuser. So now, as you become an adult and you're selecting significant others, a lot of times you will select people who are showing you toxic love, because maybe you don't know what non toxic love looks like. Maybe you lack the understanding that love is not supposed to hurt. Okay. And that kind of brings me to another point. So, a lot of times when most of us were young, and we were getting whippings, our parents always said, I'm doing this because I love you. And there was no additional explanation. There was no, I'm doing this because I don't want you to go out and do things that you're going to suffer uh, more severe consequences for, right? And again, we talked about it in a previous live, that whipping your children with extension cords, switches, hangers, punching them, hitting, slapping them in the face, things like that, that is not necessarily discipline. And I do have a totally different view of physical discipline as an adult than I did when I was a child, or when I was even parenting my own children. I say that because when I was a child and I was being whipped in that way, because I got all of those whippings, I didn't necessarily see it as abuse, because in that situation, first of all, everybody that I knew, friends, family, and otherwise, were getting the same type of whippings. So it was hard to see it as abuse until I became an adult. Um, and I understood that, there is a way to discipline your children without beating them in that way. And a lot of times, dependent upon the age group, especially that our parents were in, I don't even think that they understood that it was abusive, because that is the same way in which they were being disciplined. So that being said, a lot of times what happens is you get older, and as you're looking for a significant other, and I'm going to use myself as the example, right? So when I was young and I was getting whipped in that way, um, my mother was always the dominant person in the house. She was the disciplinarian. In fact, her husband, he never did any of the disciplining. He didn't yell at us. I can't recall a time that he ever raised his voice. I've never been whipped by him ever. Um, but the other thing is that sometimes the whippings, I do believe, were excessive. And he did not ever intervene. And even the times in which he did try to intervene, she would tell him to, butt out. And he would immediately do so. I can remember at least one time, my hair was very similar to the way that it is now. I got in trouble because I cursed at my bus driver, and we were in the kitchen, and she had me by my hair, and she was shaking me back and forth violently. I was screaming, and he came walking into the room, and he said, "Hey, what's going on in here?" And she said, "Shut up, get back in that room." And he turned right around and went back into the room. And so as I got older and I started to date people, the men that I gravitated towards were always ones who seemed like they had the ability to protect me physically. So a lot of times that was gang members. That was someone who exhibited thug-like behavior, because I had a false sense of protection that I was looking for, that, I wanted someone who would protect me physically. Um, so that was kind of the beginning of my journey into toxic relationships. And again, as you begin to, or as you're a child and you've learned that you love your abuser, right? Because as children, no matter a lot of times what our parents do to us, whether it's physical abuse, it's verbal abuse, we end up, we still love them. We don't have the ability to see them as an abuser. We still see them as the person who provides for us. We see them as the people who take care of us, and we love them even though they hurt us. And so what happens is we end up finding relationships where people are hurting us, and we don't have the ability to immediately recognize that all the time. And so we enter into these toxic relationships. The other thing is that a lot of times when we approach relationships, right, as we're getting to know each other, we're sharing things about ourselves, we're talking about our lives, and women especially, we talk way too much about some of the things that we've been through, and we give people too much information without understanding what their intentions are. And a lot of times we get into relationships and we're giving all of this information. And if that person is a toxic individual, they are taking notes on how to manipulate you. And when they know that you've been through all of these things as a child, when they know that you have been abused in any sort of way, initially they seem very empathetic and sympathetic to that. They use that to, I'm so sorry that those things happen to you. They make us believe that they love us and that they would never hurt us. But they've understood also that we haven't been properly loved, which means that we don't know what non-toxic love looks like. We don't know what it looks like for someone to love us properly. And so we end up in these situations. I think another thing is that dependence upon the kind of relationship that you witnessed growing up. A lot of us witnessed domestic violence that we normalized. We didn't know that it wasn't normal for people to fight each other all the time. We didn't know that it wasn't normal for people to say things that were ugly to each other. In the house that I grew up in, I didn't really see my parents exhibit any love towards one another. Um, we didn't, I never saw things like, hey, babe, how are you? How was your day? We didn't hear those kind of things. They were more like ships passing in the night. They spoke when they had to, things like that. And Miss Tracy says, we love them. And once we notice the abuse, we think we can change them. At the end of the day, the only person is changing is you. So that is a good point, Miss Tracy, and that is exactly what happens a lot of times in my own personal life, because I had been through so many things as a child that were traumatic. I would often over empathize with the person that was exhibiting those types of behaviors. It would be like, oh, I understand what it's like to be hurt as a child. Because a lot of times they will share something from their own childhood or their own life before you entered it that was traumatic for them. And as they're sharing that, because you've had those experiences, you over empathize, you understand what it feels like. You don't want a person to not feel what it is to be unloved. And so you want to give them all of the love that they never had, right? And you start to lose yourself in that relationship. And you begin to accept the abuse as something that is either normal because that's what you grew up in, that's what you grew up seeing, so you don't know anything that's different, right? Because if you don't know that something's not normal until you either get help, or God places a person in your life to help you understand that those situations are toxic, you will continue to gravitate towards that situation. Even if you get out of that relationship, if you don't get the help that you need, you'll keep getting in that same relationship. If you don't learn the lesson with John, you're going to learn it with Leonard. If you don't learn it with Leonard, you're going to learn it with Calvin, and so on and so forth. You will continue to choose that same type of individual, right? So the question is, once you're in an abusive relationship, how do you get out of it? Well, the first thing I'd say is that you definitely have to acknowledge that you're in an abusive situation. But you also have to put your pride aside if that's what's keeping you from being able to share with your friends or family members that you're in that sort of situation. Because a lot of times we don't want to tell others that that's the kind of situation that we're in because we're ashamed of being in that situation. We're ashamed of the abuse that we're experiencing. So that being said, I uh, was definitely in some situations with the father of my first two children. We had domestic violence that I don't think either one of us really recognized that it was uh, not normal and not okay. Um, and we would go through the whole narcissistic love bombing and then abusing. And then he would also a lot of times find push my buttons to find um what exactly low self-esteem issues I might have suffered from, right? So again, as you're sharing things about yourself in these relationships that you get into, a person recognizes what it is that they can use to first tear you down and then build you back up. And I want to read this comment from Miss Tracy. We also have to teach our children that there is no such thing as a love tap. Tell boys don't. Yes, exactly. There is no such thing as a love tap. And also, when children are play fighting, a lot of times I would go to my kids' school when they were in middle school, and they would have all these boys that were play fighting, and we need to stop teaching kids that, oh, if he hits you, it's because he likes you, right? Because the psyche of that, as you begin to get older, there are a lot of people who believe that oh, he loves me, that's why he hits me. And a lot of times what happens after you get hit is that that person will shower all of this love on you and tell you how much they love you and they're sorry, and then you begin to feed into that. And Miss Tracy, you are always welcome to come on in as a guest if you'd like, so that we can have this discussion live. Just throwing that out there. Um, but yeah, a lot of times we see these kids play fighting, and we say that it's cute. We say that, if she or he hits you, that he loves you. And here's the other thing too, y'all. It is not okay for the girls to hit the boys, right? We need to teach girls that you need to keep your hands to yourself as well, because there are men who oftentimes are being hit as well. They don't see it as abuse, and neither do we, because we don't really generally talk about that. We always say that men are the abusers, but girls need to keep their hands to themselves as well. Um, and I think that we have to teach our children how to manage their emotions when they are small children, which means that a lot of times as they're having certain outbursts and things like that when they're little, we have to help them manage their feelings. We can't spank them because they're having an outburst, right? Because a lot of times children are tired. They don't necessarily understand their emotions and how to express themselves. They may be hungry. A lot of times, parents are spanking their children for displaying emotions that they don't necessarily understand how to manage. And so, again, that's how they get older and place themselves in positions to be with people who are toxic, or to become the toxic individual. Um, but again, a lot of times when we're in situations, we don't tell our friends and family. We hide what's going on from them, either because we're prideful. A lot of times it's because a lot of people advised us not to be in that relationship in the first place. And now that we find ourselves in it, we don't want to share with anybody what's happening, because we don't want them to have been right about the situation. The reality is that you don't have the ability to change anyone. You don't have the ability to change that behavior unless they are willing to go get help from a third party. So you have to be willing and able to speak and say, we need help. A lot of people stay in relationships because um, on a spiritual level, they think that they have to, and that is not the case. We have to learn all types of abuse. People seem to think that the only type of abuse is physical. There are many forms of DV. That is correct. There are many forms of domestic violence. So, and there are many forms of abuse when we're children, right? Because it's not just getting hit. A lot of times it is um, verbal abuse. It's calling names. It's saying ugly things about a person. It's mental abuse, tearing a person down and picking on the very things that cause them issues with their self-esteem. For me, one of the things that was holding me in a relationship that was abusive was I had just had my baby. And immediately after having the baby, my children's father was always calling me overweight. He was always calling me fat. Whatever he said to me, it was like, with your fat ass, things of that nature. And the more that he said that, the more that I believed it. In fact, not too long ago, I was looking at pictures of myself like 20 years ago. And of course, I was like probably more than half the size that I am now. And it made me sad to think that for all of that time, I allowed this person to make me think that I was overweight when I was a beautiful girl, but I didn't feel it. I didn't know it. And the more that he said it, the more I believed it. Left him, got into other relationships where a person would try to compliment me, but because I was still stuck on my children's father saying that I was fat, that's all I could see. I couldn't even really receive the compliment. Um, and so I stayed in that situation. And it just began to escalate. And I think that the point at which I got out, because I am pretty much just a self-aware person. I reflect a lot, I meditate a lot. But anyway, my daughter, my oldest child, I was pregnant with the second baby. The oldest baby was probably nearly 2 years old. And I remember that her dad and I got into a fight, a physical fight, while we were driving down the street. He was driving, I was in the passenger seat. We got into a confrontation over, he had actually stayed out all night, come home to pick me up in some other woman's car. And I had to go to work. So I wasn't really focused on the fact that he had been gone all night or that he was picking me up in this woman's car. I was focused on the fact that I needed to go to work because by now I understood that I couldn't really depend on him financially because he was a drug dealer. That being said, we got into a fight on our way to, while he was taking me to work. He actually came and accused me of cheating on him. Okay. And recognize that that is also a behavior that some abusers will display. When they are wrong, they will turn it towards you. They will make you the person that is doing something wrong. So he accused me of cheating on him. Um, and he actually had a whole hickey on his neck. And when I pointed it out, he punched me in the face. When he punched me in the face, I fought back. And guess what? Neither one of us were thinking about the child that we had in the back seat and the fact that we are still driving down the street. At some point, he was able to pin me between himself and the steering wheel. So I was kind of like in an awkward position, laying in his lap, and he was holding me down so that he could drive over to his mother's house where we both got out of the car. And at that point, looking crazy, just kind of bleeding and all of these different things. And I remember that when we went inside the house, I was sitting on the couch and my baby climbed up next to me and she was just so quiet. Um, and in that moment, I just recognized that I have to leave this situation. I don't want my child to grow up and think that this is as normal as I thought it was when I was growing up. And so I went home and I packed all of his things and got prepared for him to leave. And I remember that when I went back to work, that I had all of these bruises. I had a black eye. My lip was busted. I think I probably, had some bruises on my nose, things like that. And I remember telling the people that I worked with that I had gotten attacked in a road rage situation because I was ashamed, first of all, of the situation that I was in, and didn't really want to say what had actually happened. And I remember that I worked with a gentleman that had 5 daughters. And, pretty much everybody else was either believing my story or not saying that they didn't believe my story, even if they knew that it wasn't true. But he came to me and I remember that he told me, he said, I have 5 girls and I think that you're in an abusive relationship. And he offered me help and I didn't take the help, but I did put the father of my children out of the home that we were sharing together. And that was when I made the active decision that I wasn't going to um, be in that situation because I understood after it had occurred that, you know, we could have killed ourselves. We could have killed our baby. We just weren't thinking. We were fighting and not thinking. And that was not the first fight that we had been in. But it was definitely the last, and I just didn't want my baby to think that that was normal because I understood in that moment that the reason that I had allowed for that to go on as long as I did, because that's what I grew up seeing. I had uncles that were hitting their wives. I had aunties that were fighting their husbands and boyfriends, and it was just constant for me, and it became normal. And I think it was normal for him as well. And so that being said, um, I made an active decision that I wasn't going to be in that situation. And that was actually the last time that I was in a situation as domestically violent as that one was. But it wasn't the last time that I had been hit by a man. In fact, I remember one time I was working with my cousin, and I don't know what kind of behavior I was displaying, but he had asked me, he just asked me one day, he said, have you ever fought a man? And I thought to myself, like, a couple? Um, but that being said, it wasn't the last toxic relationship I was in either. Because after that, I would meet men again who I was very forthcoming with my story and telling them the things that I had experienced as a child, the ways in which I didn't feel loved, giving the narcissist. Um, I'm sorry, I'm reading comments too, guys, as I'm talking. I was just about to ask, was he raised around domestic violence? Unfortunately, when we grow up around it, we think it's normal. We do. We think it's normal, and we don't realize that it's not normal until either someone comes and informs you of the situation. And Miss Tracy made a comment earlier, guys, that you can lose your children quickly for being in domestically violent situations, and not just possibly having CPS getting called and losing your children to the system, but your children can get killed as a result of the situation that you're in, because sometimes it's you that they're coming for, and the abuser ends up accidentally hitting the children. Or sometimes you have sons that will try to intervene because they're trying to protect their mothers, and they end up getting hurt in that way. And so it is definitely not worth it. Um, so you do have to be really careful, and you have to make sure that you know the spirit of the person that you are dealing with before you begin to share all of those things. So it isn't to say that we can't, get in a relationship and share our lives and talk about the experiences that we've had. But first, take the time to know who it is that you're dealing with, know what type of individual it is that you're dating, and don't be so quick to move forward in a situation, and ask questions. You guys, ask questions. Ask that person, who were you raised by? Ask that person, what kind of home did they grow up in? Are their parents still together? Are their parents still alive? Have they witnessed any domestic violence? Have they experienced any trauma in their own lives? And you don't have to go into all of the details about the situation, but sometimes you can ask a person, if they say, yes, I have had some traumatic experiences in my life, ask them how they've dealt with those situations. If you're a person who you do go to church, there's nothing wrong with taking your significant other to your spiritual leaders and having conversations with them. Take that person around your family, and don't always be so quick to dismiss the things that your family says about the person that you're with. Sometimes people can see things that we can't. So take them around the people that you trust, and ask them things about their background. I have learned to ask a man when I'm dating him, have you ever hit a woman? And you would be surprised that some of them will tell you, yes, I have. They will sometimes say that I have and I was wrong, and they will share with you what types of experiences they had, what kind of help they either sought or did not. And one thing that I can definitively say is that if you have people who have experienced any sort of trauma or been toxic, and they say that they have not sought any professional help, if they say that they have not sought any sort of counseling, or therapy or anything of that nature, then you can probably rest assured that that person still has some toxic behaviors. And that's probably a red flag, and that's an opportunity for you to move on and get out of that situation. Because if you haven't had the help, how can one heal themselves if they didn't have the ability to recognize that the behaviors were toxic? And even in the moment that you're having the conversation, they can only be recognizing that it's toxic because that's what you pointed out. So ask that person how they've gotten help. And there are some people who believe in getting counseling prior to getting married to a person. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that, getting that information. Um, and I think that, as soon as you start seeing those red flags, you make it a point to be aware and remove yourself from that situation. The first time that somebody calls you out of your name, and it's a very negative thing that they're saying, address that. Don't just overlook it and say, well, he was just upset. Because let me tell you something, I've learned as an adult that even when I'm upset, I have the ability to communicate without being toxic. I have the ability to communicate with a person without calling them a name. I have the ability to speak to a person without raising my voice. I can still be upset about the situation without having to express myself in that manner. So again, I'm reading the comments, guys. So give me a moment. I was never physically abused, but was cheated on. That's abuse. Called me names. That's abuse. Kept money or spent bill money. Abuse. Scream at me on a regular basis. Yes, guys, there are multiple things that can be considered abusive. It's not just a person hitting you. And let me tell you something. The effects that come from uh, verbal abuse and mental abuse, emotional abuse, those things are probably even more harmful, right? Because when we're hit, a lot of times, dependent upon, because there are levels to this, right? So you can be hit to a point where a person can put you in the hospital or can actually uh, really physically hurt you. But also be aware that, those things that people do to you emotionally and verbally, they can be much longer lasting. It took me 20 years almost to figure out that I was not fat and ugly, and I had been in multiple relationships after the one that I experienced that in. But it took 20 years to figure out that that's not what I was. So those things can be very lasting. And so there are ways in which people are abusive. And as soon as you start seeing those red flags, me, myself, and many women that I have known, we make excuses. We say things like, oh, he was just upset. He didn't mean it. We say things like, it was just the nature of the situation. He was going through a lot at that time. Um, we put ourselves, oh, he was drinking at the time. He doesn't act like that when he's not drinking. Just all kind of things like that. And so uh, we typically overlook those small things that people do. And the more that we overlook those small things, the more that they begin to escalate. And so when they begin to escalate, that's when we find ourselves in situations where um, we're staying. And then we don't want to have to tell our family. Especially, we don't want to tell our family when they've already pointed out that they saw things about a person that they thought were red flags. And, we move forward in that situation. Oh, you don't know him like I know him. You don't see what he's like when he's with me. Different things like that. And so a lot of times we'll let those things go on for a while because we don't want to have to tell anyone. I think a perfect example of that. So I told you guys that I'm really transparent. God told me a long time ago if I wanted to help people, I had to be transparent. So I'm good with that. Perfect example of that situation. I was with a man, and when I first met him, uh, he was very kind. He was very loving towards me. But he also was doing drugs. And I wasn't initially aware of it, but there were certain behaviors that he started to display that I thought were like that of someone who was doing drugs, right? But I love him, right? So I was overlooking those things. And when I actually came to find out that he was, in fact, on drugs, and I definitively understood that, I wanted to love him better. I wanted to help him. Miss Tracy said it earlier. I wanted to change him. I wanted to help him. And of course, once I figured out that he was on drugs, he had all of these childhood trauma stories that he started to tell me that, in all honesty, I don't even actually know that they were true. He could have just been using some of the things that I had talked about and understood how empathetic I would be to those things, and said that he had gone through some of those things and that that was the reason why he had started doing drugs. So I wanted to help him. Now, we did go to spiritual counseling, but he was still doing drugs. He was still spending all my money on drugs. Um, and he would go out dressed as if he was looking for a job during the day. So he would leave the house in a suit and tie, and he would actually be downtown selling heroin so that he could smoke crack. That being said, I tolerated that situation for a while before I said anything to anyone because, one, I was ashamed of the situation. I couldn't put my pride aside, didn't want anybody in my family to know what I was going through. Um, and uh, Eventually, what ended up happening is that I got overwhelmed with the emotions that I was feeling and all of the stress because I was going to school, I was working full time. Um, and I started to become really, really stressed out. And at that point, I thought that I was going to have some sort of real mental breakdown. And I finally just, I was riding with my cousin one day, and just started kind of crying hard out of nowhere. And she asked me what was wrong. And I told her, I said, this man is on drugs and he has been wreaking havoc on my life. You know, he's been spending my money. I'm behind in all my bills. Like, life is rough out here in these streets. And so at that point, that's when we proceeded to go. And my family came, and we got together and we removed him from my home. And at that point, I removed him from my life. But I say that to say, um, don't try to prove a point, because the person can kill you while you're trying to prove a point. I have worked in CPS. I've worked with domestic violence victims, and you know what? That brings me to another point. Do you know I didn't even recognize myself or acknowledge myself as a domestic violence victim until many years into working at CPS. I literally had been working there probably for like 15 years before I even had the ability to acknowledge that I was a domestic violence victim. I had been in a domestically violent situation and I was a victim. And because I was a victim, there were probably still things residually and emotionally that I was experiencing that continued to place me back in situations where I was with yet another man who was abusive. But there is hope in all of that, you guys, because what happened was I continued to do counseling with my spiritual counselor. We worked on things regarding my self esteem. Uh, we went to, um, I went to counseling on my own. I began to recognize that I was, in fact, a victim of domestic violence, that I had definitely normalized it. I started to get the help that I needed. I started to go through the process of healing from all of the things that kept me in that situation. And as I did that, I began to understand that love is not supposed to hurt. Love is not something that, it has to be hurt and then feel good. Doesn't have to hurt and then you turn around and that person does all of these things to build you up and make you feel good, and then it happens again. And so I am currently in a situation where there is no toxicity in this relationship. Um, and this man and I have had a previous relationship, and we'll probably talk about that on a different live. But I say that to say that, there are times in which I am wrong and he has to tell me, but he chooses his words carefully. He's kind when he speaks to me to discuss situations where I'm wrong or where we're having disagreements. We don't raise our voices. We don't call each other out of our name. There's never any sort of intimidation in the situation. Um, so anyway, I say that to say that getting out of a toxic relationship definitely involves um, asking for help. And that's what he just commented. We have to be willing to ask for a help. Miss Tracy says, I knew it was a problem when I was praying for him to change, when I should have been praying for me to change. I got better when I asked him to repent and prayed for me to see myself or see self and make the necessary changes. That's when I moved out of the way and watched God work. you know and don't get me wrong, you guys, it's not that I'm saying that you can't be in a situation and that person can't get the help that they need and change, but it definitely involves getting help. If you are trying to fix that situation on your own, it doesn't work like that. You have got to get help, and there are many different ways in which you can do that. You can get traditional therapy. Many of you guys have spiritual leaders that you can reach out to, but definitely reach out to your family, to your friends. You'd be surprised at what other people have been through that they may be able to walk and talk you through. But that person is not willing. Thank you, Sanique. I love, love, love y'all too. If you are not willing to go talk to someone, if that person is unwilling, if you're in a situation and you say to that person, hey, I think that we need help in this situation, I think that we need to go talk to someone. If they refuse, that's a red flag. Go ahead and leave that situation. If that person is willing to go with you to get that counseling, if they're willing to go sit with your spiritual leaders or whoever it is that you're comfortable helping you with in that situation, then there might be some hope in that situation. You might be able to save that relationship, because sometimes it's not just a matter of a person. Um, a lot of times, the reason people are abusive is because they don't love themselves. They don't know how to love themselves. They've never been taught. And so, if a person is willing to go get that help, that goes a long way. But you have to bring a third party into that situation, because if you're the abused and they're abuser, how are you going to help yourself? What would you do? So I encourage everyone to make sure that you're getting help. And if you're in that situation tonight, in the comments, I will be posting where you can contact domestic violence hotlines. They can help you. They will talk you through the situation. If you need help leaving, there are many ways in which to do that. The first opportunity that you have to be out of that person's presence, you need to use that as your opportunity to get away. If you have a job that you go to, pack a go bag if you can. If you have to leave everything behind to save your life, leave everything behind. Don't worry about taking what it is that you need, because sometimes a person might recognize that, you're trying to take a bag with you to work, and wondering what it is that you're doing with extra clothes or those kinds of things. So if you have to, reach out to somebody. Don't tolerate that situation, because the next time that that person hits you, it could literally be the time that they kill you. And again, my mother was murdered as a result of the situation, that I'm sure there was probably domestic violence that occurred prior to that final incident. I'm sure that there was some incidents that had happened prior to that she didn't discuss with her family. She didn't tell them about, because she was ashamed of her own situation. And look how it happened. So when you have the opportunity, take the opportunity. If you go somewhere and you have even a moment, I mean, you guys can be in the grocery store together, but if you have a moment to talk to a clerk and say, you know what, I need help. That's all sometimes that you need to say, and there are people that'll help you. You can call some of the domestic violence lines, and they will give you a plan to actually remove yourself from that situation. If you need to find a way to get over to a neighbor's house and make that phone call, whatever it is that you need to do, because the next time could definitely be the last time. Um, Miss Tracy says, please get help. You can't do it alone. I think I was good at helping others when I worked in the DV shelter, because I was 100% real and shared my own experience. Change starts with you. You can do it. You are important and can't be replaced. And that is absolutely true, you guys. A lot of times, as I was helping people, even Miss Tracy, in situations where I was, like I said, I worked in CPS for almost 15 years before I recognized that I had been a domestic violence victim, and recognize that I had issues that were a result of that. But reach out to somebody and ask for that help. And absolutely don't be ashamed. Don't let anybody shame you into staying in a situation that you know could potentially be detrimental to you or even your children's lives. And I'm telling you now, if your children are watching you get hit, they're going to normalize that. They're going to think that it's okay to get hit. They're going to think that's the way that people communicate, or they're going to think that it's okay to hit other people. So do not stay in that situation. Um, so I want to make sure that if you're in that situation, again, we're going to post it in the comments. We're going to talk about the different places that you can go to get help. There are definitely safe houses all over every state that you can reach out to them, and there are places that you can go to get the help. You do not have to stay in a situation. A lot of times we stay in situations because we're financially dependent upon the person who is abusing us. Again, if you get in a situation where you're out finding the help, they will provide for you initially the things that you need. And once you have removed yourself from that situation, do not uh, go back. Do not go back. Don't let that person talk you back into that situation. If they haven't gotten any sort of help, then that means that absolutely nothing has changed. Miss Tracy has also posted in the comments that 211 has numbers to all the safe houses in Colorado. If you are in another state, I'm sure that they have something that is like that as well. Make sure that you call that phone number and you get help. Make sure that if you have to, there are many ways in which you can get out of that situation, but do not stay there, because it could be, for my mother, it was detrimental. And because my mother got murdered when I was young, look at all of the things that I had to experience on a super traumatic level because she wasn't here. Uh, okay, so it looks like Paul's getting on the bus. He said he might be with us shortly, so we'll be on for a little bit, but probably not much longer because y'all know I don't like talking just to be talking. Um, but once you're out of that situation, don't let that person talk you back into that situation. And if you think that you can go back, it's only if that person is getting help. And even then, don't go back until you comfortably know that they have gotten the help that they need. You guys start doing some counseling together, because generally in those situations they will have at some point you guys doing counseling together. So if they can't tell you anything other than I've had a conversation with my friends and they told me that I was wrong, that's not good enough. You need professional help. There are people who are experts at helping those situations. And I tell you guys every week when I come on, I'm not an expert, but I also have no shame in sharing my stories so that you understand um, that it can be detrimental. It can cause trauma for your children. I am happy that my own children, they have gotten therapy. One of my children she's in therapy right now. She's doing beautifully. But I helped to create some of that trauma, because you would be surprised at what children remember, right? We think that sometimes, especially if we have uh, small children, that they don't really remember those situations, or that they don't recall those situations. But honestly, it can be traumatic. And a lot of times, what happens is children see those situations, and um, there's things that they don't even know are triggering them, right? Especially for the abuser. There are a lot of times where they don't even understand why they're triggered by certain behavior or things that you say. And in that case, that's how they end up in those situations where they're re-abusing someone else. So you have to be mindful of the fact that, don't think that your children are so small that they don't see what it is that you're going through. Um, So I have thoroughly enjoyed being with you guys tonight. But I am going to post some information for those in situations. And then also, you guys, don't be afraid that if you see somebody and you think that that person is in a domestically violent or even verbal or mental abusive situation. Hey, Enrique, if you guys think that somebody's in an abusive situation, don't be afraid to ask them. You know, don't be afraid to reach out to them, take them to the side and ask them about the situation, because sometimes all it takes is for somebody to actually recognize that they're in a situation and ask them about it. Sometimes somebody asking them about it might be what prompts them to talk about it, especially if they're ashamed of it. Don't be afraid to share your story. If God places it in your spirit to share your story with somebody and talk about the trauma that you've been through, or an experience that you've had, there might be a reason for that. People are often going through things that we don't really know anything about. So don't be afraid to ask somebody about the situation. And you know what, you guys, don't think that men are not experiencing domestic violence. There are many, many men who are in situations where they are being verbally abused, they are being hit. Um, and sometimes, as a man, they don't feel like they can reach out to somebody and say that they need help, because they feel, that their masculinity is in question, that they're being hit by their wives. But many men get hit as well, you guys. So make sure that if you have concerns, if you see something, speak up. We talk about that all the time. Do not overlook the warning signs of a situation. Ask a person what they might be experiencing, offer to help them, do what you can. So that being said, I am probably about to get off here, because I don't actually know that our guest is going to make it, because he is again traveling right now. And he didn't know that he was going to be traveling today, so he might be with us next week. Um, but I say that to say, you guys, that I've been in many situations where I didn't want to say anything, allowed the situation to continue. And I think that today, the father of my children and I, we have a very healthy relationship now, that it's 20 years later, but we talk about a lot of things. And I forgive him. Um, and we are Great friends. Let me see. Somebody's trying to join me. Okay, let me see if he's available to join me because it looks like he's trying to get on. So anyway,
Hey
we are great
guys.
friends now.
Well,
Hello, hello, hello.
hi. Well, I'm actually standing here to get boarded. Um, you know, it's weird that you're talking on this subject, and I'm one to say, you know, if somebody is calling you names that you know uh, are hurtful, and they still tell you that they love you, you're in the wrong relationship. And no one should ever demean you, uh, speak ill of you, and then tell you they love you. It's an oxymoron, and it's very dangerous because I believe emotional, verbal trauma is a lot more hurtful than somebody. It's almost like it's so damaging. It's very damaging, especially when you're dealing with an idiot who wants to be violent and is narcissistic and is just an abuser of children, women, or women who abuse men. It's almost the sickest thing that you can do to a person. So when it comes down to toxic relationships and toxic people who call you below the belt names, call you fat or call you names, just period. That person don't love you. They don't love themselves. But we make the mistake of thinking people can change, and some people can with the right help. But if they don't get no help and they come back to you talking about come on back into the house, you're better off leaving and keep moving. Don't you go back in that house. So, if somebody's calling you names, somebody's just really disrespecting you, and you're feeling like you're at fault, trust me, most likely you're not at fault.
Right.
So I'm getting ready to board, but I'd like to join back in just a second.
Okay, if just check us out. We're still here. Feel free to back.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. So yeah, he reiterated some of the points that were made earlier, you guys, that it's not okay for a person if you guys, you can communicate without even raising your voice. That is something that I've learned. And I will say that, as I was in those situations that were abusive, I became the abuser, right? I've been in situations where I started calling names, where I didn't have the ability to talk to someone without saying something that was super ugly to them. And I started to recognize my behavior, because what happens is abused people start to abuse people. And so I found myself in situations where I didn't have the ability to communicate properly without yelling at somebody, without calling them the N word, right? Because that's used to be my favorite word for a man that I was mad at. And so that's not okay. And I learned that I started to reenact that behavior because, again, when we're hurt, we hurt other people. And then we start to learn toxic behaviors. And you have to be able to recognize that that behavior is toxic. But you can communicate without raising your voice. You can communicate without saying anything that's ugly. And if you can't do those things, then definitely go seek the help. And if you're just in a position where right now it's just verbal or mental, um, it's easier to go get help in that situation. But, guys, everybody make yourself available. Again, I say this all the time. Let's not be so consumed with our own lives that we don't recognize when people are in situations and they're hurting. And a lot of times people stay in situations because they're trying to prove a point. They're trying to prove that that person isn't everything that they've said. They're dependent on that person financially. And a lot of times when a person recognizes that you are dependent in a situation, they will utilize that to keep you in that situation. So make sure that you have the ability to go, uh, access either resources or that you're saving on your own. Um, but don't stay in that situation, because your children will begin to normalize it. And it definitely, I have been very fortunate. Let me just say that I have been very fortunate that none of my children have been in any sort of abusive relationships, but I'm very open with my children also. I talk to them frequently about some of the things that I've experienced. I talk to them. I'm accountable to the things that I know went on in my life that may have created some sort of trauma in their life. And I was also very fortunate that the man that I was with, that he was on drugs. My children never even knew that. Probably this might be the first that they're hearing about it. So I love y'all. But this is probably the first that my children are hearing about it, because they did not recognize um, that behavior. And yes, Miss Tracy says, stop looking down on the abused. That's true. Don't look down on them. Because we've all potential had the potential to be in a situation like that. And just because you haven't ended up in a situation like that doesn't mean that you are any more or less strong than a person is. It just means that they found themselves in a bad situation and they need help out of it. And I watched Pastor Clay, and I'll probably share that video tonight so that some of you can watch it. But she has since passed on. But Pastor Clay said, "Yo, your sister is out there in the street." Right? She had a she had a little sister that got into an accident when she was a child, while they were out. And she said when she got hit by that car, she had told her not to go out into the street. But she didn't think about that when she went and she ran to her to see if she was okay. What that means is that when your sister or your brother is out there in a situation, don't consume yourself with saying, well, I told them not to go out there. I told them not to be with that man. I told them not to be with that woman. Stop doing that, y'all. Stop doing that, because you know what? People are already beating themselves up enough. They are already hurt enough about the situation, ashamed enough about the situation that they've allowed themselves to be in. Don't spend all your time talking about them being out there, and it don't matter how they got there. All that matters now is that they need help. If you have the ability to help, help. If you have the ability to help and you're not helping, then at least do them the courtesy of not being a greater part of the problem, right? Because that is re-abuse as well. When a person is trying to leave an abusive situation and all you can talk about is, well, I told you not to be with him. I told you he wasn't a good man. They don't need to hear that. They do not need to hear that. Welcome them with love. Don't even put yourself in a position to talk about that at that moment. The I told you so. Nobody needs to hear that. So make sure that you're approaching people with love. And we do. Miss Tracy said, I can guarantee almost everyone on here knows someone in a DV situation and may not know it. But we do have to have compassion for these people. And we do have to be able to recognize that. Last week we talked about, you guys, make sure that you are paying attention to your friends, to your family, and when they have these drastic changes in their behavior. If you have somebody that's super sweet all the time and all of a sudden they're always aggressive and um, you know being mean to people, pay attention to the changes. Or if you have somebody who's always acting like sunshine and now they're all melancholy and quiet and don't have very much to say, pay attention to the changes that people have in their behavior. And again, not only will we be providing information for how to get help in domestic violence situations, but I'll also be posting the information for if you need to contact someone in reference to suicide. Because let me tell you something, when you're in a situation that you feel like there's no way out of, suicide sometimes becomes an option for people. When they're afraid of the person that they're with, a lot of times they become suicidal. And honestly, working for CPS, a lot of times when COVID first happened and everybody started getting on lockdown, those children were stuck in the house with those abusers. And a lot of times abusers in domestic violence, they may hit the significant other and never put their hands on the children, but it still is detrimental to them because they're watching that. They're learning that behavior. They think that it's okay for someone to hit them. They're learning that that's how a person expresses their love. So, let's just be aware and let's be compassionate to people. Let's not wonder and talk about how they got into those situations. And one of the things that I will say that, um, one of the things that put me in a situation is that um, I didn't like that my family, who knew, I wouldn't say that they knew that I was in an abusive situation, but I definitely think that they knew that this person was on drugs. Everybody was talking about it amongst themselves, but guess what? Nobody was telling me, right? And probably because I'm a strong personality, you guys. So sometimes, when people say things to me, I buck, and not everybody is willing to buck back. And so I think that they were talking about it amongst themselves because they didn't want me to become upset with the situation, but that kind of frustrated me once it was over. That everybody was like, "Oh yeah, so and so and I had a conversation, and we talked about that. We thought that he had been on drugs." Man, don't do that. And sometimes, you know what, you have to not only speak up, you have to be willing to. Uh, so what if a person is going to buck? If you know that that person is over there in a situation and they have children that are potentially in danger, so what, they gonna buck back. I have a really good friend of mine and several people in my life that when they recognize that, I'm not going to say I haven't been in a situation in that like that for a very long time, but I appreciate that the people that I have in my circle, they are not afraid to say things to me for fear of how I might respond, because again, I'm a strong personality. And sometimes I buck, but you know what? I have people that are willing to buck back, and I appreciate them for that. And we always have conversations afterwards because we know that we do things in love. But don't be afraid to say something to somebody because you're afraid of how they're going to respond. Because again, my biggest reason for coming on here is always the children, but of course I want to love on everybody. I don't want anybody to feel like they're in a situation where they're overwhelmed. I don't want anybody to be in a situation where they're being hurt in any shape, form, or fashion. But we do have to first and foremost be worried about the children. And the worst thing that anybody can do is know or suspect that things are happening. And then once the person actually ends up passing away, or once the children end up hurt, then we're like, oh my God, I should have said something. I should have did something. Too late, too little, too late. When my mother got murdered, she, I don't know all of the details. A lot of what I get is just what I hear. But I've heard from different family members that she said that she was afraid because her boyfriend was threatening her. And, as an adult, my question was, what did you do with that information? Did you say, hey, girl, oh, if you think he's going to hurt you, because she kept saying that she had to move. She was afraid that this man was going to hurt her. My question is, uh, did you tell her to come stay with you? Did you offer to go stay with her? uh how did you offer to help her? So I'm just saying, in that situation, don't talk amongst yourselves. And at some point, we've all had that bad, right? We talk about people in our neighborhood, we talk about people in our family. Ooh, girl, I think she over there and he's doing this, that, and the third. Stop doing that, y'all. Don't sit up and be the person gossiping about somebody and not offering them a way out, not offering them some sort of assistance. That is bogus. So if that's what you're doing, stop doing that. Offer your assistance, or go find somebody who can help them and refer them to that person. Don't put them in a situation where you guys are sitting around gossiping about it and not offering any assistance, because that is ridiculous. So I just came on. I come on here every Friday to love on you guys. And look, guys, I have different love earrings because I always want you to know that I love you. Um, and I do love absolutely everyone. So if nobody told you today, I love you. You are absolutely right, Miss Tracy. Too many people looking out the window and not in the mirror. And that just means that you need to, let's stop talking about people, y'all. I really put myself in a situation where I try not to engage in those situations. I am not going to sit here before you and act like I have never participated in gossip. I'm not going to sit here and act like I have never talked about somebody and didn't offer my assistance. But since I've had my fully grown woman on, I do not do those things. I will not sit and participate in those sort of conversations, because in all honesty, that is probably equally abusive, to sit around and think that somebody's in a situation and you're talking about it, but you're not trying to offer them any assistance. Um, so I love absolutely every one of you. Again, I want you guys to be mindful that the holidays are coming up. A lot of people have lost people. This is definitely a time of year that, having lost those loved ones, not that they don't grieve all year long, but this is definitely a time where sometimes those emotions are amplified. Let's be mindful about paying attention to our behaviors, the behaviors of the people around us. Let's be mindful of making sure, um, that we are, offering assistance if people need it. Ask people what they need. And sometimes we don't ask people what they need because we're afraid of what they're going to say, because we don't actually factually want to help somebody, or provide the things that they need. So therefore, we don't ask. Listen, you don't always have to be the one to give them the assistance, but you can certainly ask them if they need anything. And a lot of us have access to resources, or we know people who have access to resources. So let's make sure that we are asking people what it is that they need. Um, and like I said, don't engage in conversations where people are gossiping about somebody. And, it's easy to, sometimes you redirect, and sometimes you have to be direct and say, I do not want to engage in any sort of gossip. If they're telling you about someone that they know, ask that person, how are you helping them? What assistance have you offered them? Don't sit there and listen to it. Um, but make sure that you guys, these holiday seasons, and on a regular basis, not just the holidays, I'm just saying the holidays because that's definitely, when suicide rates go up. That is definitely a time where people get, the most into their emotions and feelings about the ones that they are missing. So make sure you're paying attention to their behavior. You're right, Nina. She says a simple "How are you?" goes a long way. You'll be surprised at what a person will tell you if you just say, "How you doing? Do you need anything?" And like I said, you don't have to always, if you don't have the resources, or you don't have what it is that they need, somebody that does. You can help them get the access to the resources. You can offer yourself if a person says that they're in a situation, you know, you can offer yourself as an assistance. I can give you a ride to wherever it is you need to go to get to a safe house, things like that. And be very mindful in your conversation of not making them feel ashamed of the situation that they're in. Don't make them feel weak and powerless. There are many volunteer opportunities. I like to, volunteer at domestic violence shelters during holidays like Mother's Day, because as a mother, could you imagine that you're already in a bad situation, and here you are stuck in this domestic violence shelter and thinking to yourself, wow, I have really failed my children. you know Go offer to do something nice. Yes, Nina says we all know somebody that knows somebody that can help, and we do. If you don't have the resources, somebody that has them, or somebody that knows somebody. Get that person some help. Don't let them stay in those situations. So anyway, you guys, I'm getting ready to get off here because at this point now, I'm just talking. But if anybody, wanted to come on with me, sometimes, listen, y'all, I love y'all, but it's hard feeding off my own energy. I know that, uh, sometimes people think you just like hearing the sound of your own voice. I told y'all when I was little, I got in trouble all the time because they said you talk too much. Um, but I now I realize that God gave me the gift to gab because some people need to hear certain things. And I'm also very transparent in my situation. I tell all my business, y'all. And I don't tell my business, just to be telling my business. I tell my business because somebody needs to hear it. I tell my business because somebody is right now in a situation similar to some of the ones that I've been in, and they feel ashamed of the situation that they're in. They're ashamed to go ask somebody for help. They're afraid of the way that their family is going to talk about them. They're afraid of the way that their friends and coworkers are going to talk about them. So I tell my business, because I want people to realize that you don't have to be ashamed, and that many, many people have been in situations just like the one that you might be experiencing right now. You'd be surprised at some of the walks of life that people come from that you don't know anything about. You do not have to be ashamed. You are not a weak individual. Uh, you just need some help, and we are here to make sure that you get it. So I hope that you guys enjoyed tonight, and I hope that you share the content. The message, it may not be for you. It might be for somebody that you know. And a lot of us have friends on these social media platforms that we don't actually know personally. It may be for them. So I ask that you share the content. Again, I'm not here to get famous. I'm here to make sure that people know that they have someone in the world who loves them, someone in the world who is willing to provide some sort of assistance. I can't save everybody, but if I just save one, that's definitely enough. And I'm being obedient to the assignment that God gave me. So I absolutely love you guys. I thank you for joining me. I thank you for everybody who was on interacting with me, commenting. I thank Paul for trying to come on. Maybe he will be better situated next week and he can come on and sit and talk with us. But I absolutely love you guys. I hope that you have a safe weekend, that it is enjoyable, that you get some rest and relaxation. I encourage you that if you know somebody and you think that they're in a situation, get them the help. If you don't feel comfortable approaching that person, maybe there's someone else that you can reach out to that would be. Um, so share that information, and again, don't be afraid. A lot of times when you try to help people, the reason that they buck is because they're ashamed. It's not because they're angry at you. It's not because they're upset that you're in their business. A lot of times it's just that shame that creates that anger. So don't be afraid to ask. But anyway, I absolutely love each and every one of you. And I will see you guys next week. Mwah.